I have several items on our agenda, but first we're going to do roll call. Is that Gary?
Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here, and also Joe Garantano is asking if someone could add him into the meeting. He's not getting video or audio right now.
Councilmember Rambod, Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Garantano is here, and Chair McCutcheon.
I'm here.
Are there any changes to the minutes, additions, deletions? Ms. Clark?
Yeah, this is just a tiny little change, but I noticed on number 3, it says Parks and Tails. I thought that was such a fun name for like a dog park. I had to mention that, like Parks and Tails instead of Parks and Trails. That's all.
Any others? All of those approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? The motion passes. Do we have any
Thank you.
citizens that would like to do public input?
Chairman Cutchin, we do have several in attendance on Zoom, and it looks like we have one who has already raised their hand. With your permission, I'll let them in to address the committee.
Please do so.
Thank you.
Good evening. Ms. Fisher, would you like to speak?
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can.
All right, thanks. I'm going to save you all the agony of listening to me say again what I've already said at all of our other meetings. I just want to restate that our stance has not changed since the last meeting in December. We still are completely opposed to the proposal to restore the allowable permitted uses at the List Fish business that is up for discussion again this evening until all of the motors have been changed out and verified to be those indicated by Dr. Thunder in his original report. We are fully in favor of maintaining the current daytime and nighttime hours, as well as redefining the general nighttime ambient background level noise to reduce level that is in accordance with the ANSI 12.9 level and is referenced in the last paragraph of Dr. Thunder's most recent memo from January 27th, which I read to be recommended as 39 decibels. My understanding from speaking with Dr. Thunder back in April of 2020 and from what he has indicated in this new memo, the new motors would make that reduced level completely attainable. We do still have 2 outstanding questions, and actually I've added 1 new question that we would hope to get addressed this evening or in the near future. Again, we're asking if the current slight reduction in noise is most likely temporary, as we believe. What will the solution be when the motors are once again turned up or back on this spring and the noise returns as loud and nonstop as it had been for the past 8 years? If the city is told at some point that the motors have all been replaced, will Dr. Thunder be re-engaged to come out and confirm that this has in fact taken place? That may have been answered before, but I don't remember, or I don't think so. And last, the new question that we have is, will there be new testing done to measure the ambient background noise away from the fish farm, as Dr. Thunder suggests in his latest memo? We appreciate your continued efforts on this, and thank you in advance for any help you have in resolving our ongoing concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher, for joining us. Are there any other speakers?
Chairman Cutchin, we do have a few others in attendance. With your permission, I'd like to give them the opportunity to use the raise hand feature or the chat feature to let us know if they'd like to speak this time.
Please do so.
Madam Chair, I'm not seeing any indication that anyone would like to speak.
Thank Thank you, Ms. Fisher, for participating, and for those of you listening, we're glad to have you aboard. Thank you so much for coming. Our next action item is planning matters. We have one item ready for consideration. It's the work plan for review of previous changes to the zoning ordinance and noise code for constant emitters of noise, all wards. Mr. Bunich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and members of the committee, before I begin the department's hopefully brief presentation on this particular item, I do want to note that on the screen tonight is Dr. Tom Thunder. Dr. Thunder has been an integral part in the discussion relating to the aquaculture operation, both from the city's perspective, but as you just heard, from the residents' perspective as well. Ms. Fisher noted that she had also talked with Dr. Thunder. And I would also note that we've made Dr. Thunder available to Mr. Lisk as well. The idea being, again, that if Dr. Thunder can find solutions, I think those solutions should be voiced to all parties, not just necessarily the city personnel or elected officials. So we're very happy tonight to have Dr. Thunder available to participate in this conversation. His background is extensive, and certainly this is what he does on a day-to-day basis. And after you hear from him, you'll probably feel like, wow, Joe doesn't know what he's talking about. So, and that's fine. With that, I do want to thank you all for your patience. As you know, we've been discussing these particular matters, particularly the three items that are up for consideration tonight for many, many months. And I know the strain of coming back to something and kind of restarting and then talking it through, then restarting and talking it through can be tedious and certainly isn't the approach that you would want in most instances. However, each time that the committees looked at this matter, they've had good questions and good suggestions and things that needed further research. And that's the reason why it has taken as much time as it has. Tonight, though, I hope that the committee finds that between the input from Dr. Thunder, the comments from the operator of the aquaculture operation, and the neighbors will lead us to a conclusion. First and foremost, at the last meeting, the Department of Planning recommended a 39 decibel level for the nighttime ambient background level of noise. There were concerns on the part of the committee about that standard because it is one of the lower standards that is published or at least identified in many, many publications. That concern led the department to contact Dr. Thunder. And my question to Dr. Thunder was very simple. Is that standard reasonable or not? In conversations with Dr. Thunder, the department believed that that standard may be a little too aggressive. And therefore tonight, based upon the comments of the committee and input from the consultant, the department is recommending a change to that 39 decibel level to 45 decibels. The department believes that that standard, which is referenced by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the standard used throughout the state of Illinois, is a more reasonable standard and certainly an improved standard from the 50 decibel that is currently in the cities and counties noise code. Relative to the hours, as you know, the department has supported retaining the current hours as defined in the noise code. For daytime hours, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. For nighttime hours, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Other communities look at their variations to that. I've seen them as short for nighttime hours as 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. But I think the hours that are currently in place should be retained. Finally, in terms of the permitted uses in the non-urban resident district zone property owned by Mr. Lisk, the department is advocating that the restrictions that were put in place several years ago be removed and that full rights for permitted uses and any accessory uses to those permitted uses be allowed. In the report and past reports, the department has continued to state that development of permitted uses on that property, at least in terms of a single-family dwelling, would be a positive for the property and I believe the neighborhood itself. With that, Madam Chair, if you would not mind, I would like to have Dr. Thunder at least comment on the nighttime ambient background level of noise and then be available for any of your questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Thunder?
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes, sir. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Sorry, I'm speaking to you out of a Hampton Inn Hotel in Southern Illinois. You might see the internet go out, but I'm sure you will come back fairly quickly anyway. So I can never guarantee how good it is, but it's good to actually meet you all. Joe, it's good to see you face to face. Stephen, you're a man of my heart. I see a guitar hanging on your wall. I'm in a rock band myself. With a name like Thunder, I couldn't do anything else but get into a rock band, right? Just a few things. I had read over some of the stuff that Joe had sent over to me. We can talk a little bit about some basics of environmental noise. When you're looking at environmental noise, in my 35 years of experience, it's not so much the absolutes, it's the relatives that are involved, because we all have expectations. When you move into a rural area that's very quiet, your expectation is it's going to be quiet. On the other hand, if you move into a more dense urban area, your expectations are a little bit lighter than that. So in general, we can find that the audibility, the clear audibility of the sound is one component of annoyance. Obviously, the more audible it is, the more annoying that sound is. And so that's clearly a component of environmental noise annoyance. The other thing is the character of that noise, and your code already concludes some of that. It includes, for example, a 5 dB penalty, if you will, or adjustment for those kinds of noise that creates a tonal sound. And we have technical definitions on how to define tonal sound, very technical, but I like to tell lay people, if you can hum along with it, it's a pure tone. You know, broadband noise is like waterfall noise. It's like air rustling through the trees, wind and so forth. But if it's a humming sound, like from a fan or a blower or something like that, it's known to cause more annoyance than the same decibel level, but for an innocuous character sound. So that's an important element, I think, in any kind of code, and we're kind of moving toward that. In fact, the state of Illinois has had a penalty for pure tone sound emissions as well. The other kind of character of noise that's superimposed upon the actual measurements is an impulsive sound. That would be like a hammering, a banging sound, a coupling and so forth. They are known to be more annoying than you would think. And I find it more recently too, I've been getting involved in a number of nightclub issues and so forth. With the advent of the subwoofer, which is a specialized speaker producing low frequency sound for a lot of bands. In fact, I'll tell you that my band has one. We wouldn't play a gig without having a subwoofer. Why? Because it gives that kick drum a little bit more pronunciation, and it gives our bass guitars a little bit more presence and so forth. But I can also tell you at studying festivals and outdoor wedding parties and even indoor types of bars and taverns, when there's a subwoofer involved and it's turned up loud and that low frequency is there, that's also a character that we're seeing that is very annoying to a lot of people. Very difficult noise to control when it's low frequency, but if it's low frequency, I like to describe it as a kind of a rumbling sound, a boomy character to that sound. And we've all experienced that kind of character. Pulling up to a stoplight, for example, in the middle of winter, when you have all your windows closed and everything, what do you hear is that thump, thump, thump sound from the car next to you, and you're looking around trying to figure out where that sound's coming from. It's coming from that car. They probably have a subwoofer in it, and even though they have closed windows, that sound is easily transmitted through the windows and into the adjacent cars. So character is important. So it's really level and character. level in terms of annoyance, when we talk about the expectations, I kind of steered you toward the ambient sound levels that are typical in certain areas. And I steered you toward that ANSI standard, the American National Standards Institute standard, that gave typical levels for different kinds of neighborhoods and communities. And in that standard, you'd see that a rural area is very typically about 34 dB. In a quiet suburban area, we're talking about 39 dB, but in a more densely populated urban area, that typical noise level is about 44 dB. So the kind of sound that you have from the aerators of the fishery is where it might be fine if that same operation was near a suburban area or an urban area. It's highly audible in a rural area that's quiet. And the other thing with the fishery that we found is that there was that presence of that tone that we talked about. If you read my earlier report, the tonal sound was like 15 dB higher than the rest of the sounds. And in our measurements, when Mr. Liskett replaced one of the pumps, we just measured one. That's all we needed to do to find out what impact this would have. We found that not only was the sound level a little bit lower, but the biggest thing that we noted was that tonal character was removed. And in talking with the residents, that's really been a big part of that the issue out there is the presence of that humming, that tonal character that's typical of a blower of any sort. And it's related to what's called the blade passing frequency. Anytime you have a fan or a blower, we can calculate that easily. And I think we did this on this job where if you know the number of blades on a blower and you know what the RPM is, you know how fast it is, I can calculate what's called the blade tone, which is the frequency. And if our measurements are identical to that frequency, then we have positively identified the source, which we did in that place. Now, noise starts to be an impact for most people when the sound from the sources are about 5 to 6 dB higher than the background noise. So if you were to apply that kind of rule of thumb, you'd find out that a good limit for a rural area would be 5-6 dB above the rural area level of 34 dB, which would put us at, would put us at a rural area of 40 dB, which is very close to the 39 that we're talking about, 45 dB in a suburban area, and 50 decibels in a more urban area. So if you've got a neighborhood that or community that's kind of a mix of maybe a downtown section versus a suburban type of area with a community of multifamily or single family homes, but they're all on a track, that'd be more suburban. And then you've got rural areas. So it sounds like you've got a mix of at least 2 or 3 different types of neighborhood. And there's no one single level that's going to adequately address that. It would be too restrictive to have a 40 dB requirement near a shopping center or something where you see a lot of traffic, or along that corridor, that Highway 100 corridor, for example, because you have a lot of that ambient noise that masks that type of sound. And so being sensitive to that, I think, is very important. Another element is daytime, and I think you have that included in your current code, is most codes certainly allow more noise during the daytime hours, typically about 10 dB. That's what Illinois has. Illinois goes from 45 to 55 dB from nighttime to daytime. The US EPA basically says the same thing. And the reason for that is because people are more tolerant of noise during the daytime hours. So that was another question you had about how do you define the hours, the nighttime hours. In Illinois, it's defined as 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., and that's congruent with the US EPA definition of nighttime. But I've seen a number of codes, particularly in rural counties and so forth, that define that like you define it, from 7 p.m. Until 7 a.m. So it's a 12-hour period. In California, for example, those codes have a special evening. So they have 3 sets. They have a daytime, a nighttime, and an evening, and they define their evening hours as 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And it's a 5 decibel increment for each one. I like the 7 p.m. Aspect of it, because I'll tell you that yes, at 10 p.m. people certainly expect quiet. They need that quiet to sleep. If it's springtime, they want to open their windows. They don't want to have to be shut in. But I would also tell you from 7 to 10 p.m., there's a lot of us that would like to go out in our patios and have a drink, converse with people, talk with our cell phones, do some gardening. Those are what I would call pleasure or relaxing hours. And so I would agree with your nighttime hours beginning at 7 p.m. as opposed to 10 p.m. in that regard. Let's see, there was a couple other things I had. The other thing that where your code is congruent with current environmental thinking is an adjustment for time. We know that the longer a sound source is on, the more annoying it's going to be. I tell people that the relation I have is I grew up around Chicago O'Hare Airport. And it's probably why I got into the area of noise, because when I was a teenager, the city of Park Ridge hired me to go out onto a park. And this is years ago, and identify which planes were flying over so that they could get some handle on the kind of noise impact for the surrounding suburbs and so forth. And I can tell you, if just 1 or 2 planes went over in an hour, it would not be nearly as annoying as having 20 planes go over in an hour. So the concept of having some sort of adjustment, more leniency, we'll say, is scientifically based, and you have that in your code already. There's equations for that, but basically the way it works out is every time you cut the duration of that sound source in half, given a 1 hour reference is reasonable, then you're allowed to go up 3 dB. In the case of the fishery, the problem with that is there's no intermittency. It's on 24/7, and it has to be. And so there's no adjustment in a situation like that. The other thing is there are times that a petitioner might want to put, say, a car wash in or something like that. I have found that a lot of car washes by necessity are placed near highly dense and heavily traveled roadways. And so a lot of codes that I've seen around the area are too strict for some of the car washes because, one, the car wash is intermittent. We talked about that. But more importantly, the noise levels, ambient noise levels that are experienced by people living in that area are also necessarily higher because of their proximity to that road in the first place. And so a lot of what we've done is to guide city councils as to setting the hours for a car wash is based scientifically on a 24-hour study that shows how the ambient noise level changes as a function of time during the day. And here in the suburban areas that we talk about up here in the Chicago area, there's good scientific reason to allow maybe a car wash to go to 10 p.m. or maybe even 11 p.m. if it's near a highly traveled road and so forth. But there are other areas that we've seen where the noise levels really significantly drop after about 7 p.m., 7 or 8 p.m. And so what we're really doing is we're taking a look at what is the noise produced by that car wash and how does that compare to the ambient noise? And the hours should be limited to the point when that ambient noise starts to drop below what the car wash would produce. And so ambient noise, again, is an extremely important aspect of setting up a code. Those are some of the comments I had, just kind of reviewing some of your documents and to answer your questions. And if you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to address them.
Does anyone have questions?
Madam
I baffled all of you, right? Okay.
I'm thinking.
Clark?
Okay, Joe.
Well, Dr. Thorne, I'm going to defer to Council Member Clark.
Okay.
Well, I have a few questions. So since we don't have all of the repairs done that you suggested, how can we determine whether or not that your suggestion has worked? I'm not saying that what your math and your science isn't right. I'm saying that, the equipment could be a problem with it, or the installation or something could have happened along the way that did not decrease this, the noise level and the intensity and tonal sound to the point that doesn't bother the neighbors. So how do can we determine whether or not that is going to work without having those replaced?
I think what we've done to date is assurance that that exactly is what would happen. The report indicates that we measured the existing aerators and then the one that Mr. Lisk found, and he spent a lot of research, a lot of time looking at it, and brought that out and got the one done. They're all identical. And so from an acoustic standpoint, there is a decibel law that's easy to remember. Every time you double the number of sources, the sound level goes up 3 dB. So if you measure the sound, say, of 1 at 40 dB, then I know when I add 2, it's going to go up to 43. And if I add another 2, so I've got double that, it's going to go up another 3 dB to 46. And so that's an acoustic addition law that's science. That's how it works. And so if I'm given an opportunity to measure an existing blower and then measure a proposed blower, I don't need to have all of them operating on. I can extrapolate that by the acoustic law that we just talked about. And when we had done that, we had found out that sound level, the overall sound level, would be about 37 dB near the property line. And that would certainly be within the 40 dB limit if you were to choose to have one in a rural area. In fact, just to mention, in Christian County in Illinois, I participated with them with wind turbine noise, and they also had like a 45 dB nighttime limit. But there again, because of the character and nature of the wind turbine sound, and with the 32 dB level out in the rural areas, it wasn't too hard for that county board to limit the sound level to 39 dB, specifically for the wind turbine manufacturers. So certainly they have modeling programs. They know how much sound their wind turbines produce. And so they're able to model that, even though those wind turbines aren't there, they're able to monitor, extrapolate that to individual properties to assure the county that the operation of those wind turbines would be within that 39 decibels. So for most part, what they have to do is go back to the drawing board, because they only were ready to get it to Illinois law. Illinois law was 45 dB. But the neighbors wanted it lower because of the rural aspect of the neighborhood and the particular character of sound emitted from these. And so we actually made background sound measurements at night to show what kind of an impact a wind turbine would be. So they would have to go back to their drawing board and add to the buffer zone. Instead of 1,200 feet, they might have to make it 1,800 feet to allow sound to dissipate. And for the most part, when you're looking at mitigating sound issues, you have three choices. You can control the source. In other words, do engineering controls to reduce the intensity of the sound. Number two, you could look at the path by blocking it or deflecting it or absorbing it in some way. And typically, if you're outdoors, that usually means a tall berm. Maybe it means a lot of bushes and a lot of trees, but not just a few trees. It has to be pretty thick and dense. That's called a path control, or a fence, a tall fence. Those are all examples of controlling the path. The third option you have is controlling the source. And this is basically asking the homeowners to close their windows and turn on the air conditioning. That's typically not a very acceptable approach. And building a barrier and a tall wall, sometimes it will work. But the best thing from an acoustic standpoint is exactly what we've shown on this, that by replacing those noisy units with quieter ones, you're able to solve that issue. If we were to go out, I don't know how many were replaced now. I think, Joe, maybe you mentioned 2 of them might have been switched out.
Actually, according to Mr. Lisk, one has not been altered and one has been partially altered, but all the others have been changed out.
Okay, not sure what partially altered means in this context. But in acoustics, it's always going to be an iceberg effect. It's until you control all the sources, you can't expect to see a substantial reduction. You'll see some reduction, to be sure, but you really want to be able to switch out all of them. Measurements could be made to be certain on what's there now to see if it's going in the right direction. But you wouldn't expect it to be what we projected it to be at 37 dB until you switched all of them out.
Could I follow up on that, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I just am concerned about it not having been completed by now, and the not being able to evaluate it and verify that all of them have been switched out with the appropriate equipment. And I know where you're coming from. I did NVH as an engineer with Chrysler for many years for noise, vibration, and harshness. And we always had a joke that, if you can't get rid of the noise, you just make a better radio. So
well, that's another option here. You could put a fountain in that pond.
Yeah, and
yeah.
It does help, but I just still have a problem with this. And if we came down to a number of decibels and decided on 39, and then at one point in your note you said plus or minus 3 dB. I understand it all, and it's not 3%. That was one of my questions before. How did we get up 3%? But 3 dB in tolerance, it looks like a 6 dB in tolerance, actually, plus or minus 3 dB. But
yes,
that's not. Is the 5 dB of the correction, is that on top of that, or is that included in the 3 dB instead of the 3 dB?
Well, I mean, you mean in terms of adjusting the limit, the noise level limit?
Yeah, you've got two paragraphs. One talks about tolerance of 3 decibels.
Oh, okay.
Or 6 decibels, I should say, because it's a
Okay.
plus. But and then in the last paragraph, you talk about the correctional calculation where you're adding 5. Well, I guess it wasn't that paragraph. The next to last paragraph. And
okay.
I'm just saying, is it 3 or is it 5?
Well, I think you have two concepts maybe confused here. When I saw in your proposed code and you talked about a plus or minus 3%, in acoustics, we don't use percent, we use like 3 dB. And so if you're looking at kind of a variance, for example, these typical background noises that I gave you, ANSI would tell you that they're good to within plus or minus 3 dB. So when they say that in a rural area, typical sound level is 34 dB, what they're saying is that generally it's going to be between 31 and 37, plus or minus 3 dB. 3 dB, by the way, to the human ear is a just noticeable difference. The human ear cannot detect a change of only 1 dB. A 3 decibel change is a just noticeable difference. So when we say plus or minus 3 dB, that's just a just noticeable difference. A 5 decibel change is considered to be a clear difference. It's considered to be a significant difference. And that's why we say in setting a environmental noise code, or when we take a look to see the validity of noise complaints, we ask, is the noise from this source 5 or 6 dB above the background noise? So what we're saying is this source clearly audible, compared to the background noise. And so those are the two concepts we're talking about. I think maybe you might be talking about two different things. And the pure tone correction was 5 dB. I think maybe you were talking about that too. That if you make a measurement, then if there's a tone in that noise, then you would add 5 dB to come up with what's called an effective sound level. And then you would compare that with your noise code. You could do it the reverse way to say, well, our code is 40 or 45 dB, but if there's a tone, then it's 5 dB more restrictive. So either way, it gets you where you want to be.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just saying for our code to make sure it's clear in what's being written up, that it's not going to be, it says, if we had a 39, say, for example, 39, and then it's plus or minus 3, that this, the variation in this level of noise that's out there. And we're not going to add 5 to the upper limit of that. It's going to be at the nominal, right? It's going to be at the mean. It's going to be at the 39 plus 5 is going to take us to the correction. It's not going to be the maximum of that number. So our limit's going to be at 39 plus 5, which would be 44, not 42 plus 5.
If yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Thunder. Madam Chair, with your permission, the department had originally offered a 39 decibel level for the nighttime ambient background level of noise, and did that 3% based upon proximity to certain activities like the airport in the north half of the rural area of Wildwood, or Route 100 in the south half of the same. When the department received the information from Dr. Thunder, the thought was it's getting too complicated, and that's why it is now recommending 45 decibel for that nighttime ambient background level of noise, with no correction other than for the discrete tone. And that discrete tone correction would be a reduction of 5 decibels. So it would be 45 in the rural areas, and if a discrete tone is associated with the source, then it would be 40.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to make it simpler, I guess is what I'm saying, but still ratchet it down to preserve what I consider as a key element of the rural areas of Wildwood. I've always talked about the night sky. We're losing that battle because of our neighbors, but I think we can still win the battle on the quiet environment people move out to the rural areas of Wildwood for. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions for Dr. Thunder?
Yeah, Joe, I think that's pretty reasonable. If you have 45, then that's for what I would call neutral noise. If you had any of those adverse characters that we talked about, like the tone, then that would be more restrictive by 5 dB. With the 3D plus or minus 3 dB, are you saying that if this was located in an area where the ambient noise would actually be a bit higher, that it'd be more lenient? I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Dr. Thunder, that was exactly what I was thinking originally, is
Okay.
that if you're in a rural area, but your lot adjoins Route 100, then there should be some leniency possibly toward that location. But again, with now recommending not 39 decibel levels as that background, that nighttime ambient background level, and increasing it to 45, I think the adjustment no longer needs to exist. And I guess that's my question to you, Dr. Thunder. Am I way off base?
That's okay.
Well, if we haven't obviously studied in that Route 100 corridor, but that's a 4-lane highway. I would expect that as your homes are closer to that highway, that the sound levels are going to go up quite a bit. And any petitioner should be allowed to make, before you determine if any source violates the standard, you need to make background measurements. That's integral to the ANSI standard. So when you make a sound measurement, you might have the microphone pointed at the source you're interested in, but that microphone is picking up the sound from all over the place. And so we're not trying to make anybody responsible for noise that they don't generate. So all codes, good codes, would allow for a correction for the background ambient so that I can make a measurement and then turn that sound off and make an ambient noise measurement in order to subtract that out of there. And honestly, basically, it comes down to the fact that if I turn the sound off, the source sound, and the sound level doesn't drop all that much, even if it's above the code, then it's not that source maker that's making the noise. It's all the ambient noise. So that's a critical part of adjudicating these cases, is to have a background measurement as well as a measurement with the source on. And so, Joe, when you're in those noisier areas, then that certainly would be even more critical that you have a measure of the background noise.
Are you responding?
I noticed Councilmember Dodwell had raised her hand, so I was going to defer.
Ms. Dodwell?
I just have a quick question so that I can scientifically, from my perspective, wrap my head around some of this. In reading the document for the code that you prepared, Joe, and in listening to Dr. Thunder this evening, I just want to make sure, are the updates to the code going to allow us to make appropriate levels in the particular LISC situation? I saw a reference to grandfathering was allowed, so he would be grandfathered to continue to operate in his current level, or he would not be grandfathered, and so he has to move to this particular standard.
Based upon the testing that Dr. Thunder had completed at the LISC aquaculture operation, if all the blowers or aerators are converted to the improved type, even with the 45 decibel level for the nighttime ambient background, with the correction of -5 decibels, Mr. Lisk would comply. More importantly, the sound nuisance or the sound problem would be corrected as well.
Okay, when I was reading through the updates to our code, I guess I just read it incorrectly, that he would be grandfathered in, and so there was nothing that he had to do. And I was like, wait a minute, well, that's not what we want.
Yeah, Mr. Lisk's objection is that if we went to a 45 and 40 with the discrete tone deduction, or if we went to 39 with the 5 decibel discrete tone reduction, that it'd be very difficult for him to comply with the current situation. But Dr. Thunder's analysis indicated that if all the blowers or aerators were converted to the type that Mr. Lisk has, for the most part, manufactured himself, he would be at 37, as I recall, 37 decibels, and would be compliant to the recommended standard that's before you tonight.
So
yes, and excuse me, a large part of that is the fact that the newer blowers has no pure tone component. And so there'd be no 5 dB penalty, if you will.
Yeah. So what are our next steps as a city to ensure that he completes the tasks that need to be completed? Because we've been dealing with this for probably 6 or 8 years now. And I'd like to put a closure to his lack of compliance and make it Ambient for the neighbors that have been so gracious as to accommodate his business in an urban, or not an urban, but in a residential area. So how do we make sure that the rest of the aquifer components are completed successfully and that the sound mitigation has been attained as we head into the springtime and the summertime season?
Well, under the current noise code, at least based upon the analysis that was done by two different firms, one
Mhm.
McClure Engineering here located in the St. Louis region, and then Dr. Thunder,
Mhm.
the current situation under our current code was not in violation, but compliant, barely, but compliant.
Mhm.
So the idea was that the situation was grandfathered and the aquaculture operation could continue, but we restricted the uses of the property to kind of eventually gain a conditional use permit for that operation. What the department is recommending now is changing the playing field, so to speak, which would, for all intents and purposes, encourage Mr. List to complete the one aerator that is halfway modified and then complete the final aerator that has not been yet modified. Therefore, then we would have compliance under either standard, the current or the proposed.
And how are we going to go about ensuring that that takes place and in what timeline?
Well, I may be foolish, but in many conversations with Mr. Lisk, he has always promised that he would complete the modifications and try to be the best neighbor possible. I think by changing the playing field, we're giving him the right to do permitted uses on his non-urban resident district zone property. But we're also saying we're ratcheting down the noise levels that you have to comply with. So if you don't finish it, then there's a good chance that you'll get a warning notice and eventually potentially a violation.
And how much time does he have before he has to fully comply?
In my conversation with Mr. Lisk today, I believe he is going to try to do it within the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, then I would just ask that city staff stay on top of that so that we can provide those residents who have not had a good ambient experience since he started his business, be able to have a good ambient experience starting this spring when the weather warms up enough that they can sit outside, which certainly would fall pretty much immediately after that 4 to 6 week period.
I can also comment too that Mr. Lisk was very cooperative when we were down there. Instead of making measurements back by the residents, I'll call that a property line measurement, he allowed us to go onto the property and make measurements within 50 feet of the motors. That gave us the cleanest, the best, most repeatable data. Because when you're further from the noise source and you're closer to cars traveling on the highway or planes going over, that really obscures the data. So our report shows some very clear and convincing data on the mitigation by switching out these blowers.
It appeared to do so in the reports that I was reading, which is why I was asking the question of how do we get to the ultimate thing that we want to get to? So I think you guys have answered my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Clark?
Yeah, I would support this if we have the data, if we see that that everything is completely changed out, and we have verification that we did get the results that we are expecting. And but until that time, until I see that they have changed everything out, because we have asked for this quite a few times and have gotten pretty much the same answer. It'll be done in a few weeks. And so call me a skeptic, but I think that I can't support that until I see that it has been done, instead of saying, well, it probably will be if we go ahead and work with this.
I have a couple questions. If I heard you correctly, Dr. Thunder, you were giving different levels for the rural area, suburban area, and I think one other area. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, the ANSI standard has 6 different classifications of different kind of areas. And the ones that I referred to were rural, suburban, and what I'll call quiet urban, urban and small towns and so forth. And that standard had shown that the nighttime time average, by time average we mean an average over at least an hour period, but typically when we say a nighttime average, we're talking about from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So they're saying that a typical background level is about 40 dB, or I'm not 40 dB, 34 dB for a rural area. And then 5 dB higher than that would be a suburban area. And then 5 dB higher than that would be a quiet urban area. So it's 3 different kinds of communities. And a lot of it has to do with population density. They've correlated it with the density of the area. So the greater the population density, the greater you would expect the ambient noise levels to be.
And Joe, what's our current level? Is our current level 45, or is 45 what you're wanting to go to?
The current level during the daytime hours is 55 decibels. During the nighttime hours, it drops to 50 decibels, which according to Dr. Thunder, at least in one conversation, probably is a little too high for Wildwood.
Yep.
The 50 is too high for Wildwood? Okay, and then I kind of lost my, so personally, I'd like to see us give different levels for the different areas, because I know there's been a lot of complaint along Highway 100 and 109 for residents that live there about noise. And so I think the expectations are different depending on what type of area that you live in. So I'd be happy to see 3 different levels. I know that complicates it. But then I also have to agree with Teresa. We've been at this, I think, longer than 6 years. And I understand Mr. Lisk is making progress, but he's not there. He agreed, made several different agreements, and to date has not totally complied with the request. And residents are still suffering, for lack of a better word, because of that. So I too can't support any changes related to Mr. Lisk until he completely eradicates the situation. I mean, when he lives up to the promise, then we can come back and we can make adjustments. But until he does, there's no way for us that I know of to force him to do it. So I can't support this either.
And Madam Chair, I do have a response, but I know that council members Bartoni and Garitano have been waiting patiently. So maybe before we close, if I could have just a minute or 2.
Okay. I don't know if Mr. Garitano or Mr. Bartoni was first.
Don could go ahead. I'll go after Don.
Okay.
I would actually rather hear Joe talk first, and then I'll respond.
Well, yeah, I'm only commenting on, I guess what I heard was potentially having different standards in different parts of the city, which I think based on that logic, like that would increase the level of, tolerance, let's say, in some of the more populated areas, which is where we do have some noise complaints. And in essence, you're basically allowing it. And that's not going to solve those noise complaints in the town center area if we were to treat different areas differently, because we're getting them now. So I do think it'd be just simpler from a maintenance perspective for the city and just to have one set of rules that applies to the city. So that's my only comment that I wanted to share with that.
Thank you, Mr. Garantano. Mr. Bartoni?
I got a really bad connection today, so I've been disconnected a few times already. So I don't know, I'm not too sure if you can hear me right now, but if Joe wants to go ahead, I'd rather have Joe talk first, and then I'm interested to hear what Joe has to say right now.
Well, Dr. Thunder and I have had additional conversations about the impact of the major arterial roadways on abutting residential properties in the city of Wildwood. Dr. Thunder has provided a proposal that would work with the city on coming up with potential solutions for these major arterial roadways and the noise that they create and the impact it has on nearby neighborhoods. So that isn't going to be forgotten. As you know, when we started this process, we had 6 items that the committee defined relative to noise it wanted to address. Tonight, we're looking at just 3 of those. The other 3 is inclusive of the noise associated with arterial roadways. And Dr. Thunder thinks he can do much of this analysis from information that's available from other sources, and then proof and verify with just maybe 1 or 2 visits to Wildwood. So that item is going to be at the committee's meeting next month relative to the next steps in this process.
Thank you for that, Joe. I think that's a better solution. Mr. Bartoni?
So, I mean, I wanted to start off by saying, I mean, I agreed with Joe at the beginning that I thought the 39 decibel level was a little bit too aggressive. And, you know, this is a very unfortunate situation because we're going to have to come up with a happy medium here and compromise. And we have a risk of not making anybody happy when we're going to do that. That being said, you know, the one thing that I think we need to keep in mind as well is the area that we're referring to, and not just that piece of property or those few pieces of property, but that entire west of 109 is a growing area. So what we don't want to do is to put our hand off ourselves and to put some sort of a code in place with restrictions that would prevent us from ever anybody from moving out there ever again. I mean, we might just, you know, you might not be able to drive one more car out there than it's being driven right now. So I think we need to take that into consideration. And I think that's why that 45 number was, you know, a pretty good number. The one thing that I was kind of curious about, and like I said, my connection has been going in and out all night. It's been pretty frustrating, but I think Dr. Thunder had mentioned something about measuring the background noise. So you get a decibel level, or you measure the noise, and he uses his equipment and gets a number with the motors running and without. So I was under the understanding that that had been done, but maybe that has not been done. Has that not been done to this time?
When Dr. Thunder was in Wildwood and did the measurements at the aquaculture operation, I think Dr. Thunder, through his expertise, extrapolated the background level, and I'll let him finish.
Yeah, because we didn't go out there at nighttime. So there was no way to know what those nighttime levels were. But our primary purpose of that visit was to quantify and characterize the noise emissions that were of concern. And that's why it was important to work with Mr. Lisk at getting out there on the docks, getting close to that equipment, making good comparative measurements between what he had installed and what he proposed to install. And then we extrapolated that out to the property lines to see what that levels would be based on acoustic laws and so forth. And so that was our real goal. We had not gone out to make background measurements at night. And even if we were to go out there again, there's no way, I don't think, that Mr. Lisk could turn that equipment off. So the plan B, if you will, according to ANSI, that if you can't turn the equipment off because it operates 24/7, the Nancy calls for making a measurement far enough away from the aerators that they are not audible and the sound level from them is not a concern, but you're still at about the same distance of the primary source of background noise, which in this case would be that road. And so now you would compare what you estimate is a background noise measurement with the measurement out by the aerators at the property line to assess the difference.
Okay, I mean, I understand that about as well as I probably can at this point. I mean, that being said, it's, you know, I guess I've been familiar with or considered this for about 5 or 6 years, going all the way back. It was originally in planning and zoning on my tenure there. And then this, I think this is probably the best work that the department has done in that time. I mean, I think they really have come up with a pretty good, you know, I guess compromise, you know. But that being said, Joe, are you looking for a recommendation tonight now, or are you thinking we need to do some, you got some more homework to do and want to bring this back next month?
Well, I hate to do this to all of you, but I actually think I would benefit, and the product for you would benefit, if Dr. Thunder and I had a little bit more time to kind of go through what I'm recommending and how we might get to that point where we have a better understanding of the ambient level as it exists now. So I guess I would say I'd like a postponement, but no further than the next meeting in March. And
Do you
I'm
need a
sorry.
motion to that effect?
Okay, and I was actually in favor of actually moving forward tonight and trying to get this behind us, but I'll go ahead and make a motion. We do postpone it for 30 days upon Joe's recommendation so he can complete his work.
I'll second.
Odwell seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. And we'll have this information back from Joe next time.
Madam Chair, just a couple of things. First and foremost, thanks to Dr. Thunder for sitting in tonight and providing his expertise. It
That
was
was
much
good.
appreciated.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
Secondly, the postponement also gives Mr. List 30 days to convert the last 1.5 blowers.
Mm-hmm. And you will reach out to Mr. Lisk to let him know that?
He was on the call at the start of the meeting, so hopefully he's heard it just as much as I can say.
Okay, okay.
So our next action item is park matters. We have 4 ready for consideration. The first is the review of the preliminary design for the village green and phase 3 public input process 4 days. Mr. Bunich?
Thank you again, Madam Chair. You know, with no Kathy Arnett, you're going to have to listen a lot to me tonight, so I apologize. On the screen tonight is Ryan Gessmeyer from Human Nature, the consultant that's been handling the project for Village Green. And as you know, we've gone through 2 phases of the 3-phased approach, and we are now on the home stretch, so to speak. From our last meeting of the committee, where you all provided additional input relative to the three concepts that have been proposed for the 6-acre site, Mr. Gessmeyer and his compatriots at Human Nature have come up with what they consider a final draft design. And so tonight our effort is twofold. Ryan would like to present to you that final draft, and also the department would like your endorsement of the 3rd and final phase of public input. And with that, with the permission of the chair, I'll turn it over to Mr. Gessmeyer to go through the slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gessmeyer?
Good morning or good evening. Oh, it's been a long day. Is there a motion to nominate Joe as the most articulate man in the Midwest?
Not really.
I'd like to thank you all for hanging on the call to be able to go over this material. I'm excited to be able to share with you kind of a synthesis of several months of community feedback, 2 rounds of feedback, over 600 participants in those rounds. all contributing to what we have here as the preliminary site plan. And so it's not quite final. We're entering that third phase of public engagement, and certainly feedback from you will help to refine the last kind of the last refinements as we finalize the vision for the Village Green. So if it's all right, I'd like to go through and kind of share the content that we would like to put in front of the community for the third and final round of community feedback. And then maybe talk about a little bit about kind of how we plan to approach that community engagement process. I'm going to switch to full screen here. There we go. So everybody can still see the content. All right. So as mentioned, this is kind of like the third and final phase of this design process. So we're taking our understanding of the site and the desires and aspirations of the community. We're taking feedback that we got from kind of 3 unique concepts from the last session, where we were testing 11 different design factors. So things like the relationship between the park and the city hall, form language, nature play, pavilion location, all things that we went over during the last meeting. And then kind of bringing those things to life and trying to find a framework that balances the priorities and provides the community with a space really for where anybody can find a place. So I won't get too far into the details because we went over this in the last meeting. But largely the feedback was showed preference for a lot of the components that were in the concept C, as well as offering some insight into a few of the other components from other concepts that were particularly strong. And so in our synthesis of that feedback, we tried to address the strengths from all of the concepts, and I'll take you through that now. Yes. So this is a representation of the preliminary master plan, our site plan. As you can see, there's a strong central civic green and an axis between the pavilion and kind of an observation tower. We end up with a nice kind of garden woodland frame offering different native landscapes that help to define the green, enhance the preserved mature trees, and supplement, and also provide programmable space that can support day-to-day activities as well as more event-based activities. The overall plan is intended to kind of complete the City Hall and Community Garden campus, kind of designed to be very synergistic. In fact, looking to some of the parking at City Hall to serve the park and for loading of kind of a multi-purpose pavilion, and having a strong gateway towards the Main Street area with an enhanced kind of Crestview or Main Street extension on the north side. The park is largely viewed to be, coming from the feedback, the event space for the community. So this is a space that could be easily programmed to accommodate a variety of events, from the farmers market to barbecue bash to summer concert series, utilizing the pavilion and the open green and the large oval to be flexible and adaptable to the various needs, programming needs, but also finding a way to fit within the character and context of the neighborhood, utilizing kind of native plants and limestone outcroppings to make this feel like it belongs in this place. So here what I'm showing is the gateway. So this is from Main Street. We're showing a series of terraced gateway gardens. So this is kind of like a dovetail joint of native plantings and stone outcroppings that help welcome people into the park. We're offering kind of an ADA accessible path that weaves through that to provide equitable access to all park features. and introducing opportunities for stormwater management along the road extension, and visible signage to promote awareness of the park. The green is kind of envisioned to be an adaptable space both day and night, largely around event programming. This would be, the perfect place for, a summer movie night, getting people out on the green and community together, and ways of supporting the town center through that programming, bringing people in, and driving foot traffic for the other tenants and retail spaces in the town center. So the park offers a variety of reasons for active and passive recreation that will bring people to the area. What we have shown here is a kind of a multi-use pavilion with concessions and an area to have flexible tables and chairs during the day or become a stage or backdrop for different events. We're showing kind of this multi-purpose area here, which could be kind of a fitness green or a wellness green. They could adapt in the winter to be a nice skating rink. So thinking about multi-season interest, ways of really activating this space at all times of the year, I think you can see the versatility of a framework like this. So the Village Green is at a kind of a relative high point, or ridge between the two rivers. There's significant existing mature trees that rise above there, and we're kind of promoting this idea of near the high point, creating a very bold destination that could draw people here, but also offer incredible views out to the beautiful rolling hills. Doing so in a way that fits within the existing tree canopy. The shaft of that could be a beacon of light and art, demonstrating unique placemaking elements like a stone base, living wall, art perforations, that sort of thing. The base of this would offer restrooms that would serve the play environment in an open shelter, and then enhancing the existing vegetation with kind of woodland, layered woodland gardens down here with native plants. You begin to see, how that observation deck just rises just above the existing tree canopy. The canopy itself would shield it from kind of the adjacent residents, but it would offer panoramic views out to the land, and certainly help to provide a kind of a novel destination for those wanting to gain a different perspective. But with all the talk about programming, this is also a framework that is meant to kind of balance Wildwood's natural legacy with that programmable civic space. And so really preserving and enhancing some of the natural areas, the trees, to be able to provide those nice meandering paths and quiet places of respite, and having natural native vegetation that can support biodiverse habitat, pollinators. And on the bottom, you can see a unique play environment that is a reflection of kind of that natural legacy that Wildwood has to offer. And so, adventure play using landform and water features, interactive water features that provide educational and demonstrative benefits, as well as kind of a unique, at least for Wildwood's park system, aquatic environment, offering different levels of engagement and play for different age groups. So we're really trying to create environments that are accessible to all abilities and confidence levels, that can promote, year-long play with kind of nature-inspired amenities. In the middle here, we have this pedestrian bridge that offers kind of a perch for parents to be able to look at what's going on with their kids below without really being in their business, and then using seat walls that help to kind of define the edge, provide casual places to sit, and define the play environment. Restrooms would be close by. and parking would be accessible in multiple directions. So just to highlight some of the numbers here, we envision an additional 59 parking spaces that would serve the park, and this would come in multiple phases. It's envisioned that an expansion to the existing city hall parking lot would make a logical first phase. And so a combination of parking and handicap accessible parking would be available. And then when the Main Street extension project moved forward, that could also often offer an additional several dozen angled parking places. These are parking places that could serve as parking or could easily be adapted for event use. But for larger events, we would be considering kind of a district parking approach. So thinking of the town center, surface and structured parking, and potential shuttle services to be able to circulate people to and from these events in ways that manage congestion responsibly. Accessibility was a big driver in the layout and kind of working with the topography and layout of some of these features. So it was very important to provide equitable access to all pathways and programmed areas throughout the park. This is kind of operating at a high level, and then certainly in the detailed design of all this, universal accessibility would continue to be a driver. So thinking about this as an adaptable space that can support different events, a lot of the feedback that we received was that this should be the event space for civic programming. And so in order to accommodate that, we have areas for almost 100 pop-up tents, which would include the main ellipse and kind of reappropriating some of the parking spaces for vending tents. We have the stage and the pavilion with the concessions area. We have kind of an open shelter, potentially reservable shelter for revenue generation. This could be a beautiful place for wedding receptions. We have the event lawn, which could accommodate 3,500 people based on its size and its openness. We have that fitness kind of multi-purpose area, which could serve as a fitness green or ice skating rink, envisioned to be designed to be versatile across the seasons, providing family-friendly, accessible restrooms and concessions, as I mentioned. So these were some of the images of programming activities throughout the year that the community identified as favorites. And so the framework that I've shared with you is largely intended to be able to accommodate these. And there's always the framework of the park, but then when you start getting into the details and the storytelling and the narrative of place, there's a lot of opportunities to layer in storytelling elements. And so around the ellipse is an opportunity for donor bricks. We have these native gateway outcropping gardens. We have the woodland gardens, which largely preserves the existing trees and enhances with another story of native plants. Opportunities for interpretive features. So these nodes could be a variety of things, from public art to, you're still able to see that my computer just did something funky.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay.
Not now, something. Now it's gone. Now it's back.
All right. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so, talking about the founding of the city. Apologize if I get dropped, I will be back. Are we good now? Everybody can see the screen? Okay. So I think that I'm going to take my cue that this slide is ready to move. So thinking about, multiple meanings to the village green from a sustainability standpoint, how to demonstrate performative landscapes. So we're talking about green roofs for the pavilion and the open shelter. ways of demonstrating kind of the journey of a drop of water. So that would be rainwater harvesting and conveyance. We have the native plantings throughout. Geez, jumping all over the place, I apologize. And again, tree preservation was a major driver. But all of this is meant to be kind of this confluence of where the wilds meet the town center. So attempting to balance kind of the natural legacy with a programmable civic amenity that supports the town center. That is the content that we would like to share with the community for this third round of feedback. We intend to do that taking a multi-pronged strategy that employs some of the methods that we used before. Largely the question that we're wanting to get feedback on is, what's missing? This is what we've heard from you. This is how we're packaging this. What's missing? And we'll be using a range of strategies from, Facebook and social media outreach. I believe I'll be working with Travis Newberry on this call to coordinate that. We'll have SurveyMonkey and other outreach strategies. Are there any particular questions, or Joe, is there anything you would like to add?
No, sir. I'm anxious to hear the comments and questions from the committee.
Deborah, you're on mute.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah. Ryan and Human Nature, as well as Joe and the rest of the city team, you have done a great job throughout this process. I mean, you've synthesized over 700 resident comments, feedback in this. So I think you're hitting the nail right on the head as far as what the residents want. Certainly my comments are in line with what you're doing there. And, you have the recipe to bring it together, and certainly it's presented to us tonight. So, I think you're on the right track. You guys are experts in what you do. It certainly shows. And, I would be happy to endorse that you continue to move forward to the next phase, which would be to get feedback on this draft. I believe it's master plan, I guess, that for the Village Green. So I'm happy to make that motion there. But I think I couldn't add anything at this point, and certainly you having synthesized all those resident comments certainly means, that you've incorporated all that. So thank you for that. So I'll just get it on the floor to put the motion that we recommend moving forward with the next phase of the Village Green Master Plan.
Mr. Fleischer seconded the motion. Katie, you wanted to speak?
Having served on the Community Park Planning Committee several years back and gone through that whole exercise, I just have to compliment you guys and your team of expertise to be able to pull this into a park that takes the future with the past, the land use that we so vehemently fought for out here in Wildwood, with the modern amenities that our residents are asking for, and blended it so beautifully together. I mean, just looking at those pictures, I'm ready to go start walking through this park daily. So I want to applaud you and your team, Ryan, for taking the aspects that our residents are looking for. I think we've got a great set of information that we can go out and survey our residents for. I think this design is going to draw people into the town center, especially with that viewing tower. I see that as an economic development component. I'm on the Economic Development Committee as well, but that's a reason to come to Wildwood, is to be able to see that view. And then here you are in the downtown shopping area, and you can go get lunch after you see that, and you can shop in the stores. So I can't wait to get this moving. So thank you very much. And I am glad that Mr. Fleischer and Mr. Garantano have already said, let's go.
Any other comments?
Katie and Joe, I just want to thank you for your confidence. Thank you.
A quick question on that, and I think you already probably have factored it in because we've said this over numerous times, but that area in the center, that kind of meadow, I don't know what you had called it on the chart, but the civic green, that's where we will definitely, we mentioned already talking about holding concerts. So 3,500 people is what I heard. I think that's a good number, but correct me, is that equivalent to current attendance or is that projected future attendance, Joe?
I would see that as projected. Again, knowing where we have to set the stage now and in the past, we've never had the space to actually, I think, accommodate the interest. And after people come and recognize, oh, it's pretty tight here, I can't lay out a blanket and hear the concert. I think once we get some elbow room, I think we're projecting that, right now we have maybe 1,000 to 1,200. I think we could easily fill that space eventually.
Yeah, I think we do about 800 hot dogs. So, or something, that's what I heard. So that means we got plenty of room to grow. And certainly because I know over in the, Wildwood Celebration Commission, that's certainly the topic we've thought about, that'll be the future location for where we could have it there. So is that, I know the total site's 6 acres. Is that, what is that? Is that like half of it in that civic green space, or I don't know if you guys know that number yet, but just.
That's about 32,000 square feet. So it's 3/4 of an acre.
3/4 of an acre. And now that'll be good to accommodate, future Celebrate Wildwood events. And I guess we'll also spread out too in some of those other areas, huh?
I would pick someplace
One of
under
the
a shade.
key items Madam Chair, I apologize. One of the key items that both Kathy and I emphasized to Human Nature, the consultant, is that we've got to have space around that civic green for our pop-up tents, whether it be for the vendors, the artists, the crafters, etc. And Ryan heard our plea. As you can see, we've got a great setup around the civic green and the area just immediately to the south. But like we do elsewhere, we're going to kind of expand out onto the street and into the city hall area. So 100 tents, and that's conservative. I think if push came to shove, as you just mentioned, we could spread out.
Excellent. All right. I didn't want to get too much into details because that's what you guys do. So, keep moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to say I think it's an excellent project and that you've turned out. I think it's going to be exactly what the public's looking for. And I think it's going to be a beautiful space. I think you did a good job of combining what Wildwood is and still giving us the ability to feature other aspects of the city as well. Green is our thing. So I think you pulled those two together. I do have a couple of questions. Joe, will the tower be within our code?
Yes, ma'am. The tower in the non-urban resident district, the limitation is 60 feet, but in the park and scenic, we have greater latitude.
And then my next question, I think you might have answered it though, Ryan. How many restrooms are in the park?
Currently, there's I'm not sure how to answer that. There's enough for between 6 and 8 stalls. So that can be configured in a variety of ways.
So there's a restroom facility at basically each end of the park?
There would be a restroom facility at the base of the tower, and then it was envisioned that City Hall would provide additional restrooms.
And then my last question, are we going to be protecting the quality of life for the residents who are going to be around the village green? Do we have a plan for that?
In the design, we are enhancing vegetative buffers and using landform to provide additional privacy. I think if I'm interpreting it correctly, are you talking about during construction?
No, and not so much during construction, but just the quality of life that the residents have come to expect, which is, a pretty quiet area, scenic. Definitely will enhance the scenery, but I'm worried about noise. We get that oftentimes when there's a new development in, and there are residents who've lived there for quite some time.
Yes, I think that there has been care taken with where vegetative buffers are. I think with programmed activities, there's certainly going to be noise, and care can be taken in the detailed design of how to best attenuate that noise. But I don't think we're creating any kind of nuisance areas by putting, high activity areas proximate to existing residents.
Thank you. Ms. Clark?
Two quick questions. On the tower, does it have stairs only, or is it wheelchair accessible?
As we have it shown, there's an elevator shaft and stairs. So it does provide a variety of accessible options for people.
Okay, and the second question is about, to go along with the noise question, what about the lighting? Is the nighttime lighting going to affect our residents around there?
So the strategy that I had envisioned, there's kind of two schools of thought with lighting. There's kind of lighting as objects. So that would be like a post-top light that serves as like a luminaire. And then there's more, I guess, theatrical lighting. And so as I'm showing it here, we have these masts that have spotlights that then project light to where it's needed. And so these would be, dark sky compliant fixtures that could really lock in on where the light is needed for activity and safety. And so it's not just providing general light, it's providing focused light where needed.
Ms. Clark, do you have anything else to ask?
No, thank you very much.
So, Mr. Winich, we have a motion on the floor, but I'm wondering, do we need to add something to that motion about moving forward with the process and what that process is going to be?
I kind of interpreted Councilmember Garitano's motion to include that, not only to endorse the plan for presentation to the residents of Wildwood, but also the process that would be used to accomplish such.
Is that correct, Mr. Garitano?
That is correct indeed. Yeah, and I do want to comment. The tower will have nice views of Ward 5.
Excuse me? What
I
did
said
you
the
say?
tower will-
I didn't quite get that.
So the tower is going to have views of Ward 5. Well, actually, maybe more than Ward 5. We have views of all 8 wards, maybe.
I'll pass that along to my constituents.
I like it. It's good. Love
So
the
we have-
plan.
We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you, Ryan. Good job.
Our next
Madam-
item, yes, sir.
Madam Chair, I offer this as an option. I know that Mr. Jacquin had stayed for this, but I do want to note it's 8:35. I don't know how long the conversation will take on the sales tax, so I just mentioned it.
Would you like to postpone, Mr. Vunich?
Well, I'll leave that up to all of you. I know we had a meeting last night and several of us have meetings tomorrow night, so I was just offering it. as an option.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, well, maybe this will help us determine what kind of outcome were you looking for out of this? Because yeah, I am concerned too. This could get into a lengthy discussion, but if this was just to start the introduction, then we might have some flexibility.
Well, for the most part, the department was hoping we could receive direction from the committee to proceed forward to City Council with a recommendation on the Parks and Stormwater sales tax. So that would require, I think, a lot of detailed conversation, because you would be the first committee, the group of 7, to basically say, we're going to put a sales tax ballot. We're going to put a sales tax initiative on the ballot. So I just didn't want to rush it, I guess is what I'm saying.
So maybe a follow-up here, Chair McCutcheon, if you allow me to, just maybe a suggestion is, I think I looked at the materials, but I don't know that I have the information to determine, like, if we're going to get to the point where we're going to recommend that, hey, Planning and Parks recommends that 40 or 35% of the park and stormwater tax go towards parks. I don't know that I would be able to make that recommendation tonight to know that. I think I'd look to more for your recommendation on that and what the park budget is, if that's what you are expecting out of tonight. I do, in my opinion, I think we probably want to come up with a number that we agree with from the park side as to what we think we would need for funding and how we would apply that money. And that's the same question I've mentioned at the watershed erosion.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I have kind of waxed and waned back and forth today about how best to address the sales tax question. And maybe the best approach for City Council is to know, maybe here are the parameters of what would be the distribution of the tax on a per year, or let's say a group of years perspective, and also what the projects might be. And then if you all concur with how it might be distributed and the projects, then maybe the question of, do we go for the sales tax, is easier to answer.
Yeah, I agree.
Everyone having read the materials, is there any information that you'd like Joe to bring back at the next meeting?
With your permission, members of the committee and Madam Chair, maybe Mr. Cross, Mr. Jacqueline, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Newberry, and others from the staff perspective can maybe frame out how we might go about the distribution and the projects that would maybe be in those first few years. And maybe that's the starting point for the next meeting, if it's acceptable to all of you.
I think that sounds like an excellent idea. Ms. Dodwell?
And if you could perhaps also include in that, not a detailed marketing plan, but how we want to roll this out to the community, what you guys would like to see the various committees approving for informational purposes. We had this discussion in our economic development meeting about how do we, what can we promote, how can we promote it? Because I think we need to get that wagon moving now in order to accommodate something going on the ballot in November. 8 months is going to go by in a flash.
Mr. Bartoni?
Thank you. And yeah, Katie kind of like took a little bit of the thunder away from me, what I was going to suggest. I like what your idea is there, Joe, to bring back next month, because I think we're going to need that information for the residents and for the public also. So I think it's well worth the wait to, get that information.
Mr. Garantano?
Yeah, I'm aligned with it too. I mean, this is a big ask of our citizens to see if they will decide whether or not they support something like this. And so we obviously we are that first layer of testing this. We're pressure testing the justification. And so that's the information we need is why, what's the case say about why we, the city needs a park and stormwater tax, and certainly what's it going to go for? Because the residents will question that and say, what's in it for us, right? And if we don't have a good answer, they will not support it. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Do you need a motion to postpone?
Yes,
So
please.
I will have to postpone this item here to the next meeting.
And Ms. Clark seconds the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? Motion passes.
Thank you.
The last two items under parks
real
are,
quick.
I'm sorry.
Real quickly, Deborah, would it be possible for us to get the information that this group of city staff puts together maybe a week ahead of our meeting so that we can sift through it, we can start formulating questions and get a better understanding so that when we come to our next meeting, we're prepared to have good discussions with them.
Good idea.
I'd be glad to do that, ma'am. And Mr. Cross is shaking his head, so he's the boss, so we'll do it.
I see lots of head shaking, so thank you.
So the last two items under Parks Matters is our typical information items. Does anybody have any questions or does staff want to make any comments?
If you look it over and have any questions, you can call Gary, Travis, or I, and we'd be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Can I say
Motion.
something first,
Oh.
Deborah?
Yes, sir. Mr. Bartone.
Okay, sorry. I wish that we would have been able to have this meeting and been able to say goodbye to Kathy. I think it would have been really nice, but I doubt she's listening to this. I hope she's not actually, but we're going to miss her professionalism and her dedication, her work ethic, and her sense of humor. I just want to wish her nothing but the very best, and wish she would have been here for us to say goodbye to her personally.
Mr. Garantano, did you want to make a comment?
No, I was happy to make a motion to adjourn, but I want to let Don speak.
Anyone else have a comment? Okay, Mr. Garantano, you make your motion.
I'd be happy to make the motion to adjourn.
By your second, Mr. Bartone seconds it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstained? No. The motion passes. Thank you, everybody, for a good meeting. Thank you, staff.
Aye.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
See you next
Really
month.
appreciated the input.
Thank you.